Diamond Lake sits among the Cascade Mountains of southwestern Oregon. At an elevation of just over 5,000 feet, this natural lake is a popular recreation destination.
You know, you're right in the peak and the top of the Cascades, and the stars with no cities to block out your view are just incredible.
Although Diamond Lake offers a wide range of outdoor opportunities, it is best known for its legendary trout fishing. Many an angler will tell you that they caught their first fish at Diamond Lake, and it brings back many fond memories.
It was really fun to catch them even when it was cold and you're freezing and your fingers wouldn't work, and it was still worth it because it was great fishing. A 12-inch trout would weigh darn near a pound or a pound and a half. And they were really fat and hard to hang on to because they were so big. You could almost always catch something that was in the 16 to 17-inch range.
Named after pioneer John Diamond, who discovered the lake while searching for a wagon route through the Cascades in the 1850s, Diamond Lake remained fishless until 1910, when growing public interest in creating a fishable lake prompted the Oregon State Game Commission to plant rainbow trout in its waters. Diamond Lake's relatively shallow waters help to create an abundant supply of bottom-dwelling insects and zooplankton. Those benthic organisms would help to sustain a remarkable natural fishery, and the rainbow trout flourished. Diamond Lake quickly became one of the most popular fishing destinations in the region, earning the name Gem of the Cascades. Although Diamond Lake had demonstrated itself to be an outstanding natural fishery for rainbow trout, it would also prove to be an excellent habitat for other species as well.
Nestled like a jewel in the Cascade Mountains of southern Oregon lies Diamond Lake, long famous for its trout fishing.
In 1940, the tui chub, a native minnow to the nearby Klamath Basin, was discovered in Diamond Lake. The invasive fish multiplied rapidly, diminishing the once plentiful food supplies and effectively killing off the rainbow trout. Rotenone, a commonly used compound for treating lakes, would be used to eradicate the tui chub from Diamond Lake. First, the lake would be lowered to decrease the amount of chemical needed and to prevent treated water from entering the Umpqua River system. A canal, complete with headgates for water control, was constructed on the north end of the lake. Once Diamond Lake had been sufficiently lowered, the water was treated with rotenone. The effects on the fish population were immediate. Although less than 100 trout were discovered after the treatment, an estimated 32 million chub were destroyed, nearly 400 tons in all. The lake was restocked in 1955 with rainbow trout. However, Diamond Lake remained closed to angling for the first year after treatment to allow the newly stocked fish to grow and repopulate the lake. Growth of the fish was excellent, and fishermen returned in numbers as fishing soon rivaled the glory days of the 1920s.
We'd have people from every state in the Union. One year we had people from between 38 and 40 countries in addition to everybody in the state. So when Diamond Lake is in production, it's the most fantastic body of water in the state of Oregon.
On the 4th of July, there used to be hundreds and hundreds of boats on the lake, especially on those holidays on the 4th of July. And early on in the season when the fishing was pretty good, even though it was cold, you could look out there from the ground and see nothing but boats.
Halloween Day, 1992. ODFW fish biologists were conducting routine studies of the trout population at Diamond Lake when they discovered the unthinkable, a tui chub. Dave Loomis was one of the fish biologists that chanced upon the chub that day, and he knew that it spelled disaster.
You put a chub, in this case that's native to the Klamath Basin, but it's brought into Diamond Lake, it takes over that lake, and it not only moves the trout aside, but it moves as far as I'm concerned, all the beauty aside. It causes the lake itself, in essence, to turn over and become very ugly.
As the tui chub multiplied, their survival rate of rainbow trout fingerlings released into the lake declined from about 70% to less than 10% by the 1990s. The changes to the lake's ecology were also affecting the amphibians, reptiles, shorebirds, and waterfowl that called Diamond Lake home. And with the decline in trout numbers, eagles and osprey were unable to depend on the lake for their food supply. All the while, as the trout fishery was rapidly declining, Diamond Lake's water quality and chemistry was changing too. Tui chub were consuming the zooplankton, which normally graze on algae in the lake. This resulted in the uncontrolled growth of a blue-green algae called Anabaena flosaque, which can release a neurotoxin harmful to humans and pets. The algae blooms would temporarily close Diamond Lake to boating and swimming for portions of the summer months. Because of its success in 1954, ODFW once again decided that its best option to solve the chub problem was by rotenone application. The project would be subject to the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. This meant that a formal environmental impact statement would be required before any kind of treatment could begin. The Forest Service agreed to lead the NEPA process. Public scoping began in the fall of 2002, and the group worked hard to include and inform the public.
We spent one whole summer going around doing public meetings in the communities in the region, just asking people what they thought, what they wanted to see done with Diamond Lake, and educating them about what had gone wrong with the science of it, and what scientists said was the most likely way that we were going to be successful in restoring it.
Finally, in December of 2004, Jim Kaplan, Umpqua National Forest Supervisor, signed the Record of Decision on the final Environmental Impact Statement. Once the go-ahead was given, it would take more than 1.5 years to complete all the detail work necessary to prepare for the Diamond Lake rotenone treatment. ODFW began preparing a budget for the project, and the Oregon Wildlife Heritage Foundation signed on as the department's fundraiser. The foundation raised nearly $2 million from numerous donors. Historically, the month of September was shown to have the best water and weather conditions essential for rotenone to be effective, and would be the target treatment date. Initially, the biggest undertaking facing those involved in the project was the lowering of the lake. By dropping the level of the lake 8 feet, it would take less rotenone to do the job, containment of the treated water would be easier, and the chub would be forced from the shallow areas around the south end of the lake. It would also be a big advantage to contract netting crews that would begin operations at the lake in the summer of 2006 by confining the Tui chub to a much smaller portion of the lake. September 2005 also marked the start of reconstruction of the headgates on the old canal, just a short distance from the ODFW weir. Built in 1954 for the previous rotenone treatment of the lake, the reliability of the old headgates was unknown, and new headgates would provide added security for containing the water inside Diamond Lake during treatment. The exterior canal that connects Diamond Lake with Lake Creek was cleared of rock, road, and tree debris that had gathered during the previous 5 decades, and culverts leading under the road to the new headgates were replaced. Following construction, a ceremony held on November 30, 2005, marked the opening of the new gates. Once the new headgates were operational, water flow through the canal would lower the lake an average of 1/4 of an inch each day during the winter. This would eventually bring the level down 8 feet overall, effectively shrinking the lake's volume of water by nearly 1/3. Winter ice was off the lake by mid-May, and as trout season began, ODFW released 20,000 catchable trout into Diamond Lake. Beginning May 13th, the harvest limit was increased to encourage anglers to catch as many fish as possible before contract netting operations commenced in mid-July. The thawing of the winter ice would also launch several months of extensive water quality monitoring at Diamond Lake. A battery of tests would be conducted throughout the summer to help determine the current state of the lake, and analysis of several factors would help ODFW zero in on the best time to administer the rotenone.
This included measuring the temperature in the water, doing water column profiles for pH, temperature, conductivity, dissolved oxygen. And this information led to decisions about when optimal time for adding the rotenone could be considered. And in addition, we also sampled the algae and the zooplankton, and so that we had a very good handle on what the condition of the lake was just prior to treatment, and so then we could also document the recovery.
Thielsen View Campground on the west side of the lake was designated as the staging area for treatment operations. The extensive, relatively flat, and easily accessible beach, made possible by the lowering of the lake, would work well for staging and stockpiling rotenone as well as loading the boats. Although rotenone treatment would be the final step in the long process of eliminating the tui chub from Diamond Lake, ODFW and a contract fisherman began removing fish from the lake in mid-July through netting.
ODFW has been monitoring Diamond Lake for years, and the current estimate of tui chub in the lake is about 90 million fish, which equals about 200,000 pounds of biomass. The goal for the netting operation is to net out about half of the biomass that's in the lake.
Overall, the contract netting was a huge success, removing just over 1.5 million of the minnows, equating to 68,000 pounds of tui chub. Of course, a successful harvest of the chub in Diamond Lake presented ODFW with yet another interesting challenge: how to dispose of the fish once they were caught.
When we're disposing of chub at the lake, we've coordinated with many different agencies to make sure that we have a very clean, very effective operation. So we have no public health issues, and it's just a very well put together and planned project where we can move chub from the lake and utilize them locally.
The greatest portion of fish was transported to a farm where they were dumped in rows and allowed to compost into fertilizer. A share of the remaining fish was donated to Wildlife Safari, a 600-acre drive-through wild animal park near Winston, Oregon. The fish were transported by ODFW to the safari the same day they were caught, and then kept in cold storage facilities until they were used to feed the bear population. A number of tasks would need to be completed involving Diamond Lake's two main tributaries prior to September. Electro-fishing surveys would be used to determine what fish were contained within the inlets, and that information would be used to help to determine the placement of rotenone drip stations in the tributaries during treatment. A temporary weir was also constructed on Silent Creek to allow stream flow through but prevent fish from swimming upstream to escape the effects of the rotenone during application. In addition, ODFW conducted non-toxic color dye tests in both Silent Creek and Short Creek.
The purpose of the dye studies in particular was to assist ODFW fisheries scientists in acquiring information associated with how fast the rotenone would trickle into the streams and down into the lake, and secondly, what kind of mixing patterns we would observe once the rotenone hit the lake. So with the dye studies, we were able to physically observe how the rotenone would move and how it would disperse, and as a consequence, it gave us all better confidence in the treatment in that particular difficult area on the south end of the lake.
Another important consideration of the restoration project was the care of the bald eagle population at the lake. During the summer of 2006, there were 5 bald eagles with 1 active nest at Diamond Lake. Without any fish in the lake after the treatment, ODFW would need to provide a supplemental food source for the eagles. In August, 2 platforms were constructed and anchored in opposite ends of the lake. Fresh salmon and trout carcasses were placed on the platforms in hopes that the eagles would adapt to the changing circumstances.
Well, what we're doing is we're putting out feeding platforms, training the birds to use those platforms and to associate them with food. And then next season, when there are no fish in the lake, we will put out approximately 11 to 20 pounds of fish every other day so that they can bring young off their nest successfully.
The lake was divided into 26 sections or grids. Deeper portions of the lake would be treated with rotenone powder, while the shallower areas would be treated with liquid rotenone. Lake sections were marked with buoys, oriented on compass headings, and GPS units were utilized to navigate boats to specific application areas. Diamond Lake was now ready. There was just one thing left to do. Rotenone application was targeted for a period of 1 to 2 days during the month of September 2006, and Diamond Lake would be closed to the public during treatment. However, the lake would remain open through Labor Day weekend, giving the public one final summer holiday, a chance for that one remaining fishing trip before Oregon's Gem of the Cascades was reset. Dave Loomis, incident commander, gave the go-ahead on Monday, September 11th. Setup of the incident command post had already begun over the weekend, and personnel were contacted as soon as the green light was given. Crews had until the next day to check in at the resort and report for duty. An incident and injury-free project was the top priority. All staff involved in application of the rotenone were certified in pesticide application, and it was critical that any employees handling the rotenone have a thorough understanding of the compound, established application practices, and the ability to follow proper safety procedures. Tyvek suits and rubber gloves would protect workers from direct contact with the rotenone, while special respirators would keep them from inhaling fumes. The most commonly used compound for treating lakes and considered relatively safe when properly applied, rotenone is a natural substance contained in the stems and roots of certain tropical plants in the bean family.
It's a natural product of a plant that grows throughout the world, primarily South America, Peru, but it's also in Australia, certain parts of Europe. And what it's been used over hundreds of years is that the folks down there found this plant that if they kind of ground it up and threw it in the water, fish would kind of start getting slower and they could go pick them up.
Early afternoon, Wednesday, September 13th, nearly 14 years after the initial discovery of the Tui Chub, ODFW crews began to apply a portion of the 179,000 pounds of rotenone to the waters of Diamond Lake. Sunny skies prevailed as the 52 certified applicators divided up into several smaller crews and went about the task of eliminating the invasive pest that had brought them all there. Based on lake profiles and testing prior to treatment, ODFW had decided on a rotenone application mixture for Diamond Lake of 2 parts per million. This mix equated to about 1.5 ounces of rotenone for every 5,000 gallons of water. 5 of the custom-made pontoon boats were designed to infuse powdered compound into the deeper parts of the lake. Each boat was equipped with an intake pump for water and rotenone, mixing the two together and dispersing the combination back into the lake through an outtake tube below the water's surface. Although the process was similar to that of the 1954 treatment, a major difference this time around would be the addition of liquid rotenone.
They've now added the liquid rotenone to the process, which is much nicer. We had all powder process, and ours was, the bulk of it was distributed from just burlap gunny sacks where the rotenone was poured into the gunny sacks, and then the rope was tied around the end of it and is pulled behind a rowboat type thing situation and distributed in that manner.
4 of the pontoon boats applied liquid rotenone to the shallower areas of the lake in a similar manner to that of the powder boats. However, the liquid boats were also rigged with a spray hose for reaching portions of the water closer to the shoreline. Besides the pontoon boats, 2 smaller flat-bottom boats were used to access the shallow, weedy areas at the south end of the lake. Starting at daylight, pontoon boats fully loaded with compound began crisscrossing the lake, working their designated grids to ensure the effective distribution of the rotenone, while crews on the flat-bottom boats again focused on the south end of the lake. Forklifts continually moved stockpiles from the beach staging area to the dock, where workers shuttled the product to the individual boats. Metal drums containing liquid rotenone and cardboard barrels containing powdered rotenone were rinsed out in the lake and later removed for recycling. Backpack sprayer crews covered the areas around the lake not accessible by boat. Workers with the pack sprayers made sure the rotenone product was applied to the smaller streams trickling into the lake, around the dock areas of the marina, small inlets, standing pools of water, and the side channels of the larger tributaries. Drip stations on Diamond Lake's 2 major tributaries, Short Creek and Silent Creek, were activated on Thursday morning while boat crews were treating the lake. These stations would provide a constant flow of rotenone into the current of the 2 creeks to eliminate any fish that might be living there. The drip stations would also remove any possibility that the chub could escape the effects of the treated lake by swimming upstream. As predicted, a storm moved into the area by late Thursday night, and by Friday morning, snow had blanketed nearby Mount Bailey and was falling at the lake. Although most crews had wrapped up their work the previous day, drip station crews would continue treatment on Silent Creek on Friday morning. Finally, at noon, as ODFW workers began to clean up and demobilize, the custom-built pontoon boats were removed from the lake, and the drip stations were shut down and removed. security discontinued all checkpoints into the area and Diamond Lake was officially reopened to the public. Rotenone treatment was now complete. By afternoon, most of the application crew had packed up and checked out, and the incident command center that had been the hub of activity during the week was dismantled. The entire project had been completed with no injuries or accidents. By all accounts, the rotenone treatment of Diamond Lake had been an overwhelming success. Shoreline counts estimated that 99% of the fish killed were tui chub. It was evident that the invasive minnow had all but eliminated the remaining rainbow trout from this once highly productive fishery. Beginning immediately after treatment had been completed, a contractor with a specially equipped boat arrived at Diamond Lake to set about skimming the dead fish from the water's surface. Removing as much of this biomass as possible would help the lake's water quality to recover more rapidly. While skimming operations continued to work the surface of the lake, crews at the staging area and resort were cleaning up the shoreline, raking and shoveling dead fish into barrels. From there, they would be transported by truck to the same farm that had received the fish from the contract netting operator earlier in the summer. Overall, in a period of 5 days, an estimated 35,000 pounds of fish, equaling more than 80,000 chub, were removed from the lake. Water samples from the lake were taken after treatment and sent to an out-of-state lab for analysis. Samples taken October 23rd showed that rotenone levels were below 2 parts per billion. At this ratio, the rotenone remaining would have no biological relevance to the lake or water flowing downstream. Exactly 14 years to the day after the discovery of tui chub in Diamond Lake, the lake was declared rotenone-free. The now fishless lake could officially begin its recovery. Water quality testing had begun years prior to the rotenone treatment, and it would continue to weigh heavily on the future of Diamond Lake. The lake would have to meet strict water quality standards before fish could be reintroduced into its waters. ODFW would take the lead on water monitoring that would not only help them to decide the best time to bring back the trout, but also to determine best practices in hatchery management. In spring of 2007, after thoroughly examining the water quality data, the decision was made to restock Diamond Lake with rainbow trout. Fish stocking would gradually increase as the lake's health improved, and while they would look to their workhorse fingerling stock to produce the trout that had come to symbolize Diamond Lake, they would also introduce a new breed of rainbow trout to the lake.
We took Fish Creek and grabbed a few trout out of there. Mowich Creek, we grabbed trapped some fish out of there, put them into the hatchery, and we developed these broodstock. We've coined them Fish Witch as a combination of those two creeks as being really the native rainbow of the Upper Cascades and North Umpqua. They're actually a North Umpqua trout, but we're managing them as a hatchery.
Shortly after the ice disappeared from the lake, ODFW fish stocking trucks rolled up to the boat ramps to release several thousand rainbow trout into Diamond Lake. Over the next month, about 80,000 trout were introduced to the lake, ranging in size from 8 inches to 12 inches, with a few trophy-sized trout mixed in to provide anglers plenty of fish to catch. Later in the spring, about 100,000 3 to 4 inch fingerling trout were carefully placed into the lake to feed and grow in the newly revitalized environment. The lake had come full circle since the tui chub had been introduced. The invasive minnow was gone, the trout were back, the diamond had been reset. ODFW, working with the Forest Service, the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, and the Oregon State Marine Board, has developed a comprehensive invasive species prevention plan. The plan includes placing interpretive signs at strategic locations around Diamond Lake and creating brochures to give to Diamond Lake visitors. The signs and brochures will document the ecological and economical impact of tui chub and the importance of keeping Diamond Lake fishable and swimmable. Ongoing education will be a critical component in the ongoing effort to keep Diamond Lake a successful trout fishery and a popular tourist destination. ODFW and the Forest Service will continue to keep the public informed as to fish stocking schedules, monitoring, creel survey results, and invasive species prevention messages. Anglers and other visitors to Diamond Lake must take an active role in keeping tui chub and other invasive species out of the lake. If everyone does their part by ensuring their fishing and swimming equipment is free of any invasive species, Diamond Lake will be fishable and swimmable for generations to come.
You know, a lot of the folks caught their first fish at Diamond Lake. And we'd really, really like to see the next generation start of catching their first fish at Diamond Lake.
Our son would fish with Dad, and then the grandchildren would come along and they've fished with Grandpa. And our kids to this day, even though they're grown, they look at it as just the most important thing in their lives.
Diamond Lake is a major part of my life, has been and always will be.
There are a lot of us that are feeling real good inside that we've made it to the finish line and that we have this diamond restored to what it should be and put it back at a place where it can be a part of families' histories now.